Hi, my name is Sprucer, and this is Friday Night Film Review. This week's review will be for Evil Dead 2, the hit horror comedy film which released in 1987. Evil Dead 2 was written and directed by Sam Raimi, who also made the original. The film stars Bruce Campbell as Ashley Williams, the sole survivor of the first film. Evil Dead 2 had a budget of $3.5 million, 10 times that of the original in 1981. At the box office, Evil Dead 2 made $10.9 million. In between the release of The Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, Raimi directed Crime Wave in 1985. However, this was a gigantic flop and was disliked by audiences and critics alike. Due to this commercial disaster, Raimi decided it was best to return to The Evil Dead, because he knew it worked. This was potentially the smartest decision Raimi ever made in his career, as the Evil Dead franchise has become one of the top horror franchises ever created. After Evil Dead 2, Raimi went on to direct another sequel titled Army of Darkness, and eventually did the Spider-Man trilogy in the early 2000s. The opening sequence for Evil Dead 2 is perhaps the worst part of the film, and was very confusing for audiences. It shows Ash and Linda going to the cabin, her becoming a deadite, and Ash burying her body. What was the purpose of this, you might wonder? After leaving the cabin in Evil Dead 1, was Ash stupid enough to return to the cabin? No, in fact, Evil Dead 2 had a different production company than the first, and they wanted to recreate the first film within the second. It's quite confusing, so let Bruce explain it.
And there's an odd thing about Evil Dead 2. There's a weird little trivia in that people think that Ash, the character Ash, was stupid enough to go back to the cabin with a new group of friends, because the way it was retold, we didn't own the rights to our own movie that was done by New Line Cinema. The second movie was done by Dino De Laurentiis. Well, we didn't have the rights. We couldn't get the rights to our own movie, which is the most ridiculous thing ever. So we just shot a recap with different actors as though that was the recap, but people thought, what's with all, he's coming back to the same cabin with these new people? What? So there's a big debate of, is Evil Dead 2 a remake or a sequel? It's a requel. You know, it's whatever you want to call it.
Evil Dead 2 is set straight after the first, and follows Ash and his experience living in the cursed cabin after his friends have been killed. During this time, he is tormented by an evil spirit, which causes all kinds of mayhem. Meanwhile, another group head to the cabin, carrying more pages from the Book of the Dead, hoping to uncover more ancient secrets. Now, let's get to the review. Unlike a lot of films I'll be covering on the channel, I don't have many negative comments for Evil Dead 2, but I will try to discuss what could have been improved on. For example, one thing I don't like is the use of special effects to create the ghost of Professor Noby. It looks low effort, and actually, I don't think this scene was necessary at all. Noby's ghost serves the purpose of telling the characters they must read a passage or they will all be doomed. It's quite cliché and cartoonish, to be honest. I mean, did we really need to know that the characters are in danger? Or were the stakes not high enough? I don't think we did, so in my eyes, the representation of Professor Noby should have been confined to the voice on a tape recorder. In the first Evil Dead, I complained that the makeup design was subpar. Thankfully, this film improves on that front leaps and bounds. The Deadites look seriously impressive. I love the way Henrietta looks in particular. She looks like an actual monster and is very scary. Fun fact, Henrietta was played by Sam Raimi's younger brother, Ted. Being inside the suit for a long time was very sweaty apparently, as at one point in the film we see sweat pour from Henrietta's ear. Another thing I appreciate about Evil Dead 2 are the stunts performed by Bruce Campbell. The chase scene and Ash flying out the car is super cool to watch. Throughout the film, it's hard to count the amount of times Ash is knocked unconscious by some crazy stunt, whether failing a front flip or smashing several plates onto his own head. Also, I like how they took the time to expand on the history of the Necronomicon, and we get more lore surrounding the evil spirits. Without this explanation of the ancient evil, the Evil Dead series wouldn't have really much story for the fans to talk about, as after all, the first two films are filmed almost entirely in the cabin. And of course, Army of Darkness wouldn't have fit into the story if we didn't know where the evil spirits came from. Oh, and how can I forget the one-liners?
Groovy.
It's funny how the scared teenager in the first film becomes a badass action hero overnight. That might be a critique for some people, how Ash's character changes with no proper development. Personally, I don't mind, as the film is totally different from the first in terms of tone. Ultimately, Evil Dead was a great film when it released and has stood the test of time. Transitioning the Evil Dead as a horror to a splastic comedy really did help in making Evil Dead 2 unique and memorable. Overall, I give Evil Dead 2 a 9 out of 10. Next week I'll be reviewing Army of Darkness, the final film in the Evil Dead trilogy. I hope to see you there. With that said, if you did enjoy this week's review, please drop a like and subscribe. Peace out.